Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Reading Culture. Today we are continuing our look at Tennyson's Idylls of the King, and particularly we are going to be focusing on probably one of the more famous episodes of really any Arthurian telling, and that is the quest for the Holy Grail. If you've heard of any particular story of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, there's a pretty good chance that the quest for the Holy Grail is one of them. And Tennyson has some unique aspects, but in a lot of ways it is very much in keeping with the general tradition of Arthurian literature, particularly from the Morte d'Arthur of Thomas Malory. However, we are going to get a sense of how, following from the tale of Lancelot, which comes immediately before it, how getting a bit of a juxtaposition, the kind of heroics that we're seeing from Lancelot, we can call them that, in Lancelot and Elaine, are not going to be the kind of heroics that are forefronted in this particular tale. So as we look at the beginning here, we're going to immediately see that a framing device is used by Tennyson. So this particular one begins, from noiseful arms and acts of prowess done, in tournament or tilt, Sir Percival, whom Arthur and his knighthood called the Pure, had passed into the silent life of prayer, praise, fast, and alms, and leaving for the cowl the helmet in an abbey far away, from Camelot there, and not long after died. So we get this sense right off the bat that Percival was a knight of the Round Table, but he gave up that life to become a monk in a monastery. And this whole tale is in many ways going to be, again, kind of like a flashback, right? A telling from the perspective of Percival. And we see exactly how that works in the next stanza here. And one, a fellow monk among the rest, Ambrosius, loved him much beyond the rest, and honored him and wrought into his heart a way by love that wakened love within, to answer that which came. And as they sat beneath a world-old yew tree, darkening half the cloisters on a gustful April morn, that puffed the swaying branches into smoke above them ere the summer when he died, the monk Ambrosius questioned Percival. Essentially what he's going to do is question him about how is it that he came to be there, right? Knight doesn't just become a monk, right? It just, not generally, it's usually just got to be a story there. And that's particularly what we see him ask. He says, "O brother, I have seen this yew tree smoke spring after spring for 100 years. For never have I known the world without, nor ever strayed beyond the pale, that is, beyond the realms of the monastery. But thee, when first thou camest, such a courtesy spake through the limbs and in the voice, I knew for one of those who eat in Arthur's hall." He couldn't disguise his knightliness. "For good ye are and bad, and like the coins, some true, some light, but every one of you stamped with the image of the king." So this idea that although some of the knights are good and some of them are bad, that they're all stamped with the image of the king is a really important image. And it will be important to keep in mind as we go through some of the last tales of this overall story of the Knights of the Round Table. Well, he begins to tell him why it is exactly that he ended up there. This is at line 30. He says that none of these, that there was no earthly passion that led him here, but the sweet vision of the Holy Grail drove me from all vainglories, rivalries, and earthly heats that spring and sparkle out among us in the jousts. While women watch who wins, who falls, and waste the spiritual strength within us, better offered up to heaven. So he says that it's this vision of the Holy Grail that's caused him to see really everything else as vainglory. All the things that knights do, competing in jousts and tournaments, right? He sees that as worth nothing now. But we see right off the bat that there's going to be a sense of sadness involved in this, as the monk, to whom the monk, the Holy Grail, I trust, we are green in heaven's eyes, but here too much we moulder as to things without I mean. Yet one of your own knights, a guest of ours, told us of this in our refectory, but spake with such a sadness and so low we heard not half of what he said. So there's a sense that right, this other knight has already been with them, and right, speaks of it with sadness. And we'll see as we go through why that would be. And so from lines about 48 to 58, we get the story of the Holy Grail. So for those who don't know, what is the Holy Grail? So the Holy Grail is a cup, right, a chalice. And it's a cup that, the story is that the cup which Jesus drank from at the Last Supper, right, the First Communion, right, of course you have the famous painting by Leonardo da Vinci at the Last Supper, right, that supper, the cup was this grail. And then there's also a tradition which actually isn't mentioned here, that when Christ was crucified on the cross, that it caught some of the blood that came from his side. But in any case, the tradition is in the story is that Joseph of Arimathea, a very minor character in the gospel account, he takes this chalice, this cup, this grail to England, and specifically it ends up in Glastonbury Abbey, where there's a miraculous kind of flower that comes in the wintertime that's related to it. And the story is that it can heal the sick, but it's eventually taken up into heaven, with the legend being that it will return. So this is the object that is the focus of the quest of the story. And we see in lines 61 to 63 or so that the legend is that there's been many lengths of years that have passed since the Grail has been seen by anyone. But it's kind of due for a return, it seems. So following this, we get the story of how the Grail has kind of come back into the lives of people of England, or specifically for the first time into the lives of the Knights of the Round Table. And it starts with a nun. This is at about line 69 to 70. We see that there's a particular nun who's related to Percival, and so even for herself, she's aware of the sins in Arthur's court. We've seen these sins in the previous story, right? Lancelot and Elaine, right? The adultery really at the heart of the court of Arthur. And there's a sense that this is known even in the monastic cell of a nun. And so she's fasting and she's praying in order to try and make atonement for the sins that are being committed in the land. And particularly, she's praying and fasting that the Grail might return to heal the land. And so we see at around line 110 or so that she tells her brother Percival that she has seen the Grail, and that all of Arthur's knights should also fast and pray just like she is, that they might see the Grail and also be healed. We're going to see a little bit how that works out in just a little bit further into the story. But before we find the Grail, we get the introduction to the knight Galahad. This is around maybe 136 or so, and we see that he is particularly notable as being the most pure knight. Right? So in many ways, he's going to be in juxtaposition to a lot of the other knights that we have seen and will see throughout. We get this rather ironic rumor, though, that he's rumored to be the son of Lancelot, though it's not believed. Right? In fact, he says this. This is 143. Sister or brother none had he, this is Galahad, but some called him a son of Lancelot, and some said begotten by enchantment. Chatterers they, like birds of passage piping up and down, that gape for flies. We know not whence they come, for when was Lancelot wanderingly lewd? So I can't imagine that he would have had a child of wedlock. And ironically, in Mallory, it actually is true that Galahad is the son of Lancelot, but it was under an enchantment. He thought he was with Guinevere, and it was someone else. But the important connection here is a sense that the most pure knight is coming from perhaps one of the most impure. So we should maybe keep that in mind as the quest begins. So we get a sense after this at 165 that this coming of the Grail is finally seen as real for Percival, right? That kind of stands there ends, and he says that he believed in her belief. That is to say, that Percival believed in his sister's belief in the Grail. Now, we're going to see in the next little bit this year of miracle, right? Starting right after that, 166. Then came a year of miracle. O brother, in our great hall there stood a vacant chair, fashioned by Merlin ere he passed away, and carven with strange figures, and in and out the figures like a serpent ran a scroll of letters in a tongue no man could read. And Merlin called it the Siege Perilous, although siege here actually means seat, so it's the perilous seat. Perilous for good or ill, for there, he said, no man could sit but he should lose himself. And once by misadventure Merlin sat in his own chair, and so was lost. But he, Galahad, when he heard of Merlin's doom, cried, if I lose myself, I save myself. So this could be a very mysterious passage. So Tennyson helps us out a bit here. Tennyson explicitly says that the seat perilous stands for the spiritual imagination. So we get this sense that the imagination, and you can imagine the spiritual imagination being that part of the human imagination which looks to things that are higher than just the kind of material realm, glory and honor and worldly power, right? Kind of even a level higher than that. But there's a sense that it's perilous. And the last line there again seems to be a paradox, right? If I lose myself, I save myself. How can you save yourself by losing yourself? This is probably a reference to a line from said by Jesus Christ in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10, verse 39, where he says, right, he who will save himself must lose himself, right? And he who will lose himself for my sake shall save himself. So it seems to be connecting this kind of paradox of, finding through loss with this seat, which is again a spiritual imagination, which is really set up in parallel to the kind of imagination it seems most of the Knights, which is based in jousting and war and things like that. So at line 182 to maybe around 202 or so, we get the actual manifestation of the Grail. And all at once, as there we sat, we heard a cracking and a riving of the roofs, and rending and a blast, and overhead thunder, and in the thunder was a cry. And in the blast there smote along the hall a beam of light 7 times more clear than day. And down the long beam stole the Holy Grail, all over covered with a luminous cloud, and none might see who bare it, and it passed. But every knight beheld his fellow's face as in a glory. And all the knights arose, and staring each at other like dumb men stood, till I found a voice, and sware a vow. I swear a vow before them all, that I, because I had not seen the Grail, would ride a 12-month and a day in quest of it, until I found and saw it, as none my sister saw it. And Galahad sware the vow, and good Sir Bors, or Lancelot's cousin, swear, and Lancelot swear, many among the knights, and Gawain swear, and louder than the rest. So we have a very interesting, first appearance of the Grail, kind of real appearance. So it appears to the knights, but they can't really truly see it, for it's covered in this great cloud. Although they can see each other's face and glory, you can imagine this being a reference to the kind of halo that you see in art. And so they all swear to find it, though notably Gawain is the loudest. We'll see how that turns out a little bit. And also notably, as we see kind of around lines 206 and 201, right, Arthur is absent for the appearance of the Grail. He's not there. He's actually there in Mallory's account, but he's not here in this one. So that is a notable thing. All right, so at lines 232 to 237, we get this description of this hall built by Merlin with these sacred carvings, which is going to tie into some of these other themes that we're seeing in the story. So about 225 or so. "O brother, had you known our mighty hall, which Merlin built for Arthur long ago, for all the sacred mount of Camelot, and all the dim rich city, roof by roof, tower after tower, spire beyond spire, by grove and garden lawn and rushing brook, climbs to the mighty hall that Merlin built. And 4 great zones of sculpture, set betwixt, with many a mystic symbol, gird the hall. And in the lowest, beasts are slaying men, and in the second men are slaying beasts, and the third are warriors, perfect men, and the fourth are men with growing wings, and over all one statue in the mold of Arthur, made by Merlin, with a crown and peaked wings pointed to the northern star. And eastward fronts the statue, and the crown and both the wings are made of gold, and flame at sunrise till the people in far fields, wasted so often by the heathen hordes, behold it crying, we have still a king." All right, so we have these 4 zones right in the carving, and they're representing human progress. The first one is the savage state of society. The second one is the state where man lords it over the beasts. They're killing the beasts. We have the full development of man, right, the kind of perfect one. And then we have the one with them as wings, which is the progress towards spiritual ideals, right? These ideals even beyond those of, say, nobleness or courtesy. Right, and that's symbolized also by that northern star at the end, which symbolizes constancy. Right? And we see this very much in the case of Arthur, although of course Arthur is in many ways manifesting these other patterns. Right, we get a reference at 248 again to Arthur's 12 great battles, right, which come from Nennius's account. We've talked about that, and which are referenced many times throughout. And it's worth thinking about, why isn't Arthur there? So Arthur hastens, this is about 260 to 261, right? He sees the smoke, he's worried it's on fire, but he doesn't get there in time. So what does that say? We also have, again, this continuingly interesting fact that he is symbolized by the dragon, right? The symbol of chaos. But remember, it's a golden one. Gold is often symbolic of purity, right? It's the purest of the metals. And we've talked about it before, that it's often on his seats and on his, footstools, the kind of thing that he's tamping down. And so there's this sense in which he symbolizes the dragon because he's the one who tames it. He overcomes the chaos. But we're starting to see things already come apart at the seams. What would it have meant for him to have seen and perhaps sought the Grail and maybe achieved it? Well, we don't get that. That's not his function in the narrative, and maybe that's not his heroic function, if we want to think about it that way, as opposed to Galahad or Percival, as we will see throughout the story. We also see Arthur, and this is about 275 to 276, we see him lament the swearing of the vows by his knights to seek the Grail, right? He wishes they hadn't done it, although they tell him that if he had been there, he would have done likewise. And indeed, he has this kind of interesting line where he says, "Lo now," said Arthur, this is at 286, "have ye seen a cloud?" Right, there's a cloud that went around the Grail. "What go ye into the wilderness to see?" This is possibly a reference to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, verse 7, where there's a similar line, "Why do you go out into the wilderness?" Right, is it to see a reed blowing in the wind? So there's some kind of echoes there. But we also get this sense of no one quite saw the Grail, right? It was veiled to them. So what exactly are they seeking? And remember, it's important to take into account that this quest is ultimately, right, going to be about more than simply an object, though it is about that as well. We also see the effect that this encounter had, particularly on Galahad, who says at about 287, 288, "Then Galahad on the sudden, and in a voice shrilling along the hall to Arthur called, But I, Sir Arthur, saw the Holy Grail. I saw the Holy Grail and heard a cry, O Galahad, and O Galahad, follow me." So in response to this, he's saying, I saw it. So one of the knights saw it, and it was Galahad, who we know is the most pure. And you may have missed the significance of this when you read it, but specifically he calls him Sir Arthur. Well, he's the king. Right? Why is he referring to him as Sir Arthur, as though he's a fellow knight? Well, it's illustrative of the level of spiritual equality that's been gained by his vision of the Grail. Right? He's almost been raised up to the level of Arthur by virtue of this sight. And the response of Arthur is kind of interesting, right? He says, "O Galahad, Galahad, said the king, for such as thou art is the vision, not for these. Thy holy nun and thou have seen a sign. Holier is none, my Percival, than she, a sign to maim this order which I made. But ye that follow but the leader's bell," right, he goes on. But the important thing is that what he's basically saying is that he feels that this kind of a spiritual quest, this kind of a vision, right, is best left to those who are truly devoted to the spiritual life. So one would be like a nun, but even someone like Galahad, who, even though he's a knight, clearly his level of kind of spirituality is at such a height that he can see it. Where he says, like, not the rest of you guys, right? You're not prepared for this kind of a thing. That being said, right, that's not going to stop them. We also see a bit more, this is 315 to 327 or so, right, that he fears lest some of the knights die in the quest, right, which seems to be another concern. However, nevertheless, things go on. From 328 to 337 or so, we see that Sir Percival and Sir Galahad, the two purest knights, prevail in the tournament. So it's not Lancelot who usually wins everything. But the knights go off. This is at 343 to 357. The king weeps, and we see the queen wailing as the knights depart. Of course, for her, it's particularly the departure of Lancelot. And we're going to see the effects of the personal toll on the knights. So, for example, around 371 to 378, we have Percival. Thereafter, the dark warning of our king that most of us would follow wandering fires came like a driving gloom across my mind. And every evil word I had spoken once, and every evil thought I had thought of old, and every evil deed I ever did, awoke and cried, This quest is not for thee. And lifting up mine eyes, I found myself alone in a land of sand and thorns, and I was thirsty even unto death. And I too cried, This quest is not for thee. So we see Percival, right? He feels unworthy. He's thinking back on all his past sins, all the wrong things he's done and said, and he feels that he isn't worthy for this quest, although he will continue on. We also get, just right after that, him saying, And on I rode, and when I thought my thirst would slay me, saw deep lawns and then a brook, with one sharp rapid, where the crisping white played ever back upon the sloping wave, and took both ear and eye, and o'er the brook were apple trees, and apples by the brook fallen. And on the lawns, I will rest here, I said, I am not worthy of the quest. But even while I drank the brook and ate the goodly apples, all these things at once fell into dust, and I was left alone and thirsty in the land of sand and thorns. So he's in this beautiful land, right? It should be a land of, you could say, temporal pleasures, but it turns to dust. It says nothing to him now in light of the quest. The Grail has superseded his earthly desires at this point. So around 427, right, we see him climbing up to this ruinous city, and it too it ultimately crumbles into dust, and he starts to wonder, will he see anything that will actually last? And then finally, at 449 to 467, we have the fuller vision. All right, so this is how it goes. Right, he's told by a phantom, O son, thou hast not true humility, the highest virtue, mother of them all. For when the Lord of all things made himself naked of glory for his mortal change, take thou my robe, she said. This is kind of a personification of glory, you could see it as, for all is thine. And all her form shone forth with sudden light, so that the angels were amazed, and she followed him down, and like a flying star led on the grey-haired wisdom of the east. But her thou hast not known. For what is this, thou thoughtest of thy prowess and thy sins? Thou hast not lost thyself to save thyself as Galahad. So we see, although Percival is pure, he's not at that level quite as Galahad. He's not willing to fully lose himself yet. When the hermit made an end, in silver armour suddenly Galahad shone before us, and against the chapel door laid lance, and entered, and we knelt in prayer. And there the hermit slaked my burning thirst, and at the sacring of the mass I saw the holy elements alone. So, right, so he's been told, right, he's not humble enough by this hermit. The hermit starts to say right, he starts to do the Christian religious rite of the mass, the communion, which involves, right, bread and wine, which, right, for Christians becomes the body and blood of Christ, but of course it just looks like bread and wine, and that's all that Percival sees. But then we see that Galahad, but he saw ye no more. I, Galahad, saw the Grail, the Holy Grail, descend upon the shrine. I saw the fiery face as of a child, smote itself into the bread, and went, and hither I am come. And never yet hath what thy sister taught me first to see, this holy thing, failed from my side, nor come covered, but moving with me night and day, fainter by day, but always in the night, blood red, and sliding down the blackened marsh, blood red, and on the naked mountain top, blood red, and in the sleeping mere below, blood red. Right? Get that poetic repetition. And in the strength of this I rode, shattering all evil customs everywhere, and passed through pagan realms and made them mine, and clashed with pagan hordes and bore them down, and broke through all, and in the strength of this come victor. But my time is hard at hand, and hence I go, and one will crown me king far in the spiritual city. And come thou too, for thou shalt see the vision when I go. So we get the sense that Galahad is able to kind of see the Grail descending in this vision that only he can see. You see this face of a child strike into the bread, the sense that he can actually see it becoming the body of Jesus Christ himself, even though no one else can see it but him. For everyone else, it's merely bread. And we get the sense that this gives him this great power. He's able to go out and conquer pagan hordes and overcome all these various things, and that he will eventually indeed be made a king, which makes us understand more clearly why he was able to address Arthur as an equal. But it's a king of a spiritual city. Again, there's a sense that this is kind of beyond the usual temporal quest that most of the knights are engaging in. But we also get this sense that Percival will eventually, he can't see it now, but he will eventually see it. And Tennyson talks a little bit about this, insofar as he talks about, well, it's really in the following section where we get this storm, about 491. There rose a hill that none but man could climb, scarred with 100 windy watercourses, storm at the top. Right? So there's a storm raging on top of this hill, and Tennyson says that it was a time of storm when men could imagine miracles, and so the storm is emphasized. So there's a sense of this kind of more miraculous time. And then we see at around lines 493 to 532, Percival sees a spiritual city in the sky. So this is probably recalling in the book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. There's this city of God, this mystical spiritual city that descends from the sky. So it's clearly participating in that kind of imagery. And we see the Holy Grail itself descending from it, which he now knows that no one else will ever see again. This is kind of its last appearance. And so this is then immediately followed, lines 541 to 554. We get the comparison between the simple life of the monk and the knight's kind of world of phantoms, perhaps you could call it. The monk is wondering, everything he saw phantoms. Was anyone he could truly converse with? And then we get a really interesting little aside at lines 569 to 605. Percival is tempted by the woman he loves most, right? The one that he had always desired. And it turns out that she had married a husband, but then he died, and now she's incredibly wealthy, and she loves him and wants to marry him and give him all her wealth. So everything he could possibly desire in the worldly life is uh, is his, right? It's all laid at his feet. But we'll see how he reacts to this, right? In that, in the end, he says uh, that he cared not for her, nor for anything upon earth. So this final temptation, even that fails, right? It's not able to tempt him. And the monk in response, he notes the monks are plagued by these visions, right, of loves once had and now lost. It's worth comparing the way Lancelot too is portrayed here. So when we see him at around line 633 to 43, we see him maddened, right? It's as though he's lost his reason, and so there's a real sense of him not being portrayed in the same way we saw him, right, as this again greatest of knights in all the previous stories. And there's this question of, is Lancelot healed by the Grail in the story? It's more explicit in the source material in Mallory that he is, but here it's not so clear. And then around line 658 to 692, we see how Sir Bors is kind of brought into the story. We see that he's mocked and captured by these pagan druids, but ultimately freed by a faithful maid. And then at lines 715 or so to 717, we get this description of this, well, really these ruins. Right, he talks about, when we reached the city, our horses stumbling as they trod on heaps of ruin, hornless unicorns, cracked basilisks, and splintered cockatrices, and shattered tablets, which had left the stones raw, that they fell from, brought us to the hall. So we get the sense that these ruins figuratively suggest the state of Camelot. Camelot has become a ruin. And as the knights return to Arthur, we see that a tenth of them have died on the quest, right? So there's been a very heavy loss, just as Arthur had feared. And we get this sense that, so Gawain starts speaking, and that there's this. It was not for the likes of Gawain. Gawain is generally considered to be one of the less virtuous knights. But we get this interesting note at line 759, where the king waits to speak to Lancelot last. Then there remained but Lancelot, for the rest spake of sundry perils in the storm, perhaps like him of Cana in Holy Writ. It's referring to the story of Jesus turning water into wine at the wedding of Cana, where right, the best wine is waited left for the end. Arthur kept his best until the last. Thou too, my Lancelot, asked the king, my friend, our mightiest, hath this quest availed for thee. And then we get this story of Lancelot. This is around line 784 to 822. He encounters these lions. He has this sword dash from his hand. Right, we get all this, symbolism of, he's only able to see the moon. He can't see the Grail, right? He's clearly missing something. At lines 830 to 832, right, we get clear as a lark, high over me as a lark, a sweet voice singing in the topmost tower. So we have the lark in the tower here symbolizing towards the rising sun, particularly symbolizing hope. So there's still hope for Lancelot. As he gets closer, he hears the praises of the Grail and the Lord of the Grail, God himself. But ultimately, the Grail is veiled, right? And he realizes that the quest is not for him. Right? And likewise, in terms of Gawain, right? So Gawain, makes this kind of interesting statement at 855, where he says, hath Gawain failed in any quest of thine? Right? And he's reproached by the king, ultimately. And we get this very interesting end to the story at about, I'll just read the very last stanza here. And this is the king speaking. And some among you held that if the king had seen the sight, he would have sworn the vow, not easily seeing that the king must guard that which he rules, and is but as the hind to whom a space of land is given to plough, who may not wander from the allotted field before his work be done, but, being done, with visions of the night or of the day come as they will, and many a time they come, until this earth he walks on seems not earth. This light that strikes his eyeball is not light. This air that smites his forehead is not air, but vision, yea, his very hand and foot in moments when he feels he cannot die. He knows himself no vision to himself, nor the high God of vision, nor that one who rose again. Ye have seen what ye have seen. So spake the king. I knew not all he meant. You get this sense, especially at that line at 908, until this earth he walks and seems not earth, that almost that the king is questioning if this material universe itself is but a vision, and that these transcendent things are kind of the reality for Arthur. And again, what is he talking about at this end? This sense of and there's moments that man feels he cannot die, right? There's a sense that man himself is kind of miraculous. But there's this question of, is Arthur an ideal, or is he a reflection of a higher ideal? You may be symbolized by Christ, or maybe is he just a shadow of it that actually doesn't reflect an ideal of perfection at all? That he's not truly a perfect union of these ideals and an actual man in this space of a king. This answer may be, or this question may be more easily answered once we look at the following stories and we see exactly what comes of Arthur's earthly kingdom in the end.